The marble floors of courtroom 302 echo with tension as Dar's Sarah Mitchell maintains her composure on the witness stand, her practiced hands, the same ones that performed delicate brain surgeries, now folded carefully in her lap. As she recounts the humiliating events of March 15, 2024, the gallery, packed with observers, leans forward catching every word as she describes arriving at Capital City Private Airport, wearing her usual professional attire, a tailored navy suit, and carrying her medical bag, having just finished an emergency surgery at Metropolitan General Hospital, where she serves as chief of neurosurgery. Dar Mitchell describes how she approached her regular hangar where her Gulfstream G650 was prepared for departure, scheduled to take her to a medical conference in Boston, where she was the keynote speaker. The plane she had purchased 2 years ago after building her private medical practice into one of the most successful neurosurgery centers in the country. She tells the court how she had completed all pre-flight protocols as she had done countless times before presenting her credentials to the new flight crew who had been assigned by Ares Aviation Services. The court reporter types steadily as Dar Mitchell recounts the shift in the crew's demeanor when she identified herself as the owner, their expressions morphing from professional courtesy to obvious disbelief. Lead flight attendant Thomas Parker stepped forward, blocking her path to the aircraft stairs, while Captain Richard Stevens emerged from the cockpit, his arms crossed in what Dar Mitchell describes as an intimidating stance. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim approaches the evidence table, retrieving the airport security footage that shows the entire 18-minute confrontation. Dar Mitchell maintains her professional tone, though her voice carries an edge of controlled anger, as she describes how the crew demanded additional forms of identification beyond her pilot's license, aircraft registration documentation, and multiple forms of government-issued ID. She explains how Parker and Stevens exchanged glances, continuing to deny her access, even after she pulled up the aircraft registration website on her phone, showing her name and ownership details. The testimony reveals how other airport personnel gathered to watch the scene unfold, including several of Dar Mitchell's regular crew members who were off duty that day but recognized her immediately. Former crew chief Michael Anderson is shown in the security footage attempting to intervene, vouching for Dar Mitchell's identity, but the new crew dismissed his confirmation. She describes how the situation escalated when Stevens suggested they contact law enforcement to verify her identity. Judge Harrison removes his glasses, leaning forward as Dar Mitchell explains how she stood her ground despite the growing crowd of onlookers, many of whom were filming the incident on their phones. She recounts accessing the Ares Aviation Services emergency protocol system on her phone using her owner credentials to formally dismiss the entire crew, effective immediately, a power specifically granted to aircraft owners in their service contract. The courtroom atmosphere grows heavier as Dar Mitchell describes the aftermath, how she was forced to cancel her keynote speech, missing the opportunity to present groundbreaking research on minimally invasive brain surgery techniques to hundreds of medical professionals. She explains how the incident triggered a series of investigations, not only into Ares Aviation Services, but into systemic discrimination within the private aviation industry. Dar Mitchell straightens in her chair as she details the discovery of internal company communications, revealing a pattern of enhanced scrutiny directed at minority aircraft owners, her testimony highlighting how the incident sparked a national conversation about prejudice in luxury services and high-net-worth spaces. She shares how numerous other minority jet owners came forward with similar experiences after her story gained attention. The witness stand creaks slightly as Dar Mitchell shifts position, describing how she has since established new protocols for her aviation staff, including mandatory diversity training and clear identification procedures for all aircraft owners, regardless of appearance. She explains that while the incident was personally devastating, it has driven her to push for industry-wide changes in private aviation services. ADA Kim approaches the bench with documentation showing Dar Mitchell's impressive credentials, including her graduation top of her class from Johns Hopkins Medical School, her numerous patents for surgical devices, and her philanthropic work establishing free neurosurgical clinics in underserved communities, highlighting the stark contrast between her accomplishments and the treatment she received that day at the airport. The first day of testimony concludes with Dar Mitchell describing her decision to pursue legal action not for personal gain, but to ensure systematic changes within the aviation industry. She emphasizes how the incident, though painful, has strengthened her resolve to fight discrimination in all professional spaces, especially those traditionally dominated by white males. Attorney James Wilson approaches the evidence screen with measured steps, activating the high-definition security footage that fills the courtroom with silent images of the confrontation. His laser pointer draws attention to specific details as the video plays, showing how flight attendant Parker positions himself directly in Dar Mitchell's path, his body language clearly confrontational. The timestamp reads 9:47 hours, marking the beginning of what would become a pivotal moment in aviation discrimination cases. Wilson directs the court's attention to the arrival sequence where Dar Mitchell can be seen presenting her documentation multiple times to different crew members. The footage reveals how she maintains professional composure despite the growing tension, her medical bag still clutched in one hand, while she repeatedly attempts to access her own aircraft. The enhanced audio playback captures the dismissive tone in Parker's voice as he suggests she might be confused about which aircraft is hers. The security camera's multiple angles reveal the gathering crowd of airport personnel, some with phones raised recording the incident while others shake their heads in visible disapproval. Wilson freezes the frame on a particularly telling moment when Captain Stevens can be seen speaking into his radio while making a dismissive gesture toward Dar Mitchell. The timestamp now showing 15 minutes have elapsed since her initial approach to the aircraft. Wilson presents a split-screen comparison showing footage from the previous week when a white male owner was granted immediate access to his aircraft by the same crew with only a cursory identification check. The timestamps demonstrate the stark difference in protocols applied as the white owner spent less than 2 minutes from arrival to aircraft boarding, while Dar Mitchell was held for over 18 minutes. The evidence presentation continues with footage from other security cameras showing Dar Mitchell attempting to pull up her documentation on her phone, while Parker can be seen physically stepping closer, forcing her to step backward. The court's attention is drawn to Dar Mitchell's body language showing clear signs of distress, though she maintains her professional demeanor throughout the confrontation. Overhead camera angles capture the moment when other airport staff members attempt to intervene, including her regular crew chief Michael Anderson, whose gestures indicate he is trying to verify her identity. The footage clearly shows the new crew dismissing his attempts to resolve the situation, their body language remaining hostile and unwelcoming toward the rightful owner of the aircraft. Wilson pauses the playback to highlight a crucial moment when Dar Mitchell accesses the Air's aviation services system on her phone, the cameras catching the exact instant when the crew receives electronic notification of their dismissal, their expressions shifting from superiority to shock as they realize their mistake, the timestamp marking this as the turning point in the incident. The security footage continues showing Dar Mitchell finally ascending the stairs to her aircraft after dismissing the crew, her usual confident stride notably affected by the confrontation, while dismissed crew members can be seen gathering their belongings and departing the scene. Wilson draws attention to how other airport personnel begin approaching Dar Mitchell, offering support and assistance once the hostile crew has left. Supporting evidence appears alongside the main footage showing timestamp data from the aircraft's access log, confirming Dar Mitchell's biometric security clearance had been validated by the system long before the crew began their confrontation. Wilson emphasizes how the crew ignored multiple electronic confirmations of her identity, choosing instead to trust their biased assumptions. The final sequence of security footage shows Dar Mitchell seated alone in her aircraft, visibly processing the events that had just transpired, while airport management personnel can be seen rushing toward the scene, having been alerted to the situation. Wilson freezes on this frame, allowing the court to absorb the full impact of the isolation and dignity Dar Mitchell maintained throughout the ordeal. Wilson concludes the video presentation by displaying a comprehensive timeline compiled from multiple security cameras showing the entire 18-minute and 27-second confrontation, overlaid with documentation timestamps, electronic validations, and witness locations, building an irrefutable case of discriminatory treatment that would ultimately lead to this historic court proceeding. Defense attorney Marcus Reynolds stands before the court representing Air's Aviation Services, his expensive suit and confident demeanor contrasting sharply with the increasingly uncomfortable evidence being presented against his client. He begins by attempting to frame the crew's actions as standard security protocol, citing increased regulations in private aviation and the importance of thorough identification procedures. The courtroom atmosphere grows tense as Reynolds presents a series of industry guidelines highlighting sections about identity verification, but ADA Kim immediately counters by producing access logs from the previous 6 months showing dramatically different treatment of aircraft owners. Based on apparent racial demographics, the defense counsel's argument begins to unravel as statistics reveal white owners faced additional verification requests in only 3% of boarding attempts, while minority owners encountered extra scrutiny 47% of the time. Reynolds calls Captain Stevens to the stand attempting to justify his actions that day, but under cross-examination, Stevens struggles to explain why he ignored the electronic verification system that had already confirmed Dar Mitchell's identity. The captain shifts uncomfortably in his seat as ADA Kim presents evidence of 15 previous instances where he allowed white owners immediate access to their aircraft with fewer credentials than Dar Mitchell had provided. The defense strategy further deteriorates as flight attendant Parker takes the stand, his testimony contradicting earlier statements about following standard security protocols. When Kim presents the Ares Aviation Services official procedure manual, which clearly states that electronic owner verification supersedes all other authentication requirements, Parker attempts to explain his decision to ignore the electronic confirmation, but his responses become increasingly evasive under precise questioning. Security expert Dr. Victoria Chen takes the stand as a witness for the prosecution, systematically dismantling the defense's claims about security protocols. She demonstrates how the crew's actions actually violated multiple safety procedures by creating a disturbance on the tarmac and failing to follow the electronic verification system that forms the backbone of airport security measures. Reynolds attempts to redirect the narrative by suggesting Dar Mitchell might have contributed to the escalation, but surveillance footage clearly shows her maintaining professional composure. Throughout the incident, the defense counsel falters as Judge Harrison interrupts his line of questioning, pointing out the irrelevance of Dar Mitchell's demeanor when she was legally attempting to access her own property. The court watches as Reynolds presents documentation of Ares Aviation Services diversity training programs, but this strategy backfires when Kim produces internal emails showing the training was implemented purely for liability purposes, with one executive referring to it as necessary paperwork to avoid discrimination lawsuits. The defense counsel's prepared narrative about company commitment to equality crumbles in the face of documented corporate cynicism. As the afternoon session progresses, Reynolds' final attempt to justify the crew's actions focuses on a series of recent security alerts at private airports, but this argument collapses when Kim demonstrates that none of these alerts involved owner verification and all had been resolved months before the incident involving Dar Mitchell. The defense counsel's increasingly desperate attempts to find justification for the crew's behavior serve only to highlight the discriminatory nature of their actions. The proceedings reach a crucial moment when Reynolds calls Ares Aviation Services Chief of Operations to testify about company policy, but under skilled cross-examination, the executive admits that no white owner had ever been subjected to the level of scrutiny Dar Mitchell faced. Moreover, he cannot explain why the crew's dismissal of electronic verification only occurred with minority owners despite the system's proven reliability and central role in airport security. Judge Harrison leans forward with increasing interest as the defense case continues to deteriorate. Reynolds struggles to maintain his composed demeanor as each attempted justification for the crew's actions reveals additional evidence of systematic discrimination within the company. The courtroom observers begin to sense the shifting momentum as the defense arguments appear increasingly hollow against the weight of statistical evidence and documented pattern of biased behavior. Jessica Torres approaches the witness stand, her hands slightly trembling as she prepares to testify against her former employer. Her Navy uniform from Ares Aviation Services now replaced by a simple black blazer and skirt. She adjusts the microphone before beginning her account of the company's discriminatory practices that she'd witnessed during her 7 years as a senior flight attendant. The courtroom listens intently as Torres describes a pattern of behavior she observed where minority aircraft owners consistently faced additional scrutiny. She recounts specific incidents, including one where a prominent African-American business owner was delayed for 40 minutes despite having more documentation than typically required. She reveals how crew members would often exchange knowing looks when minority owners approached their aircraft, creating an unofficial system of enhanced verification. Torres' testimony grows stronger as she details the internal communication channels where crew members would share coded messages about minority owners approaching their aircraft using terms like non-standard verification needed or special protocol required, which she explains were widely understood within the company. As signals to apply extra scrutiny, she presents screenshots of these communications saved during her employment, showing a clear pattern of discriminatory practices. The former crew member describes how she had attempted to report these incidents through proper channels, submitting detailed reports to management about discriminatory treatment, only to have her concerns dismissed or buried in administrative procedures. She reveals how her growing discomfort with these practices eventually led to her resignation, explaining how the incident with Dar Mitchell finally compelled her to come forward as a whistleblower. Ada Kim guides Torres through a detailed timeline of incidents she documented during her employment, each case showing striking similarities to Dar Mitchell's experience. Torres' voice remains steady as she describes how minority owners were frequently subjected to additional verification steps, excess questioning, and subtle intimidation tactics, while white owners were often waved through with minimal screening. The witness presents her personal logbook maintained throughout her employment, containing detailed records of over 40 incidents where minority owners faced discriminatory treatment. She explains how she began documenting these events after noticing the pattern during her second year with the company. Her meticulous notes, including dates, times, and specific crew member behaviors, providing crucial evidence of systematic discrimination. Torres describes the internal culture at Ares Aviation Services, revealing how crew members who questioned these discriminatory practices often found themselves assigned less desirable routes or faced subtle workplace retaliation. She shares her own experience of being moved from premium routes to regional flights after raising concerns about the treatment of minority owners. The testimony takes a powerful turn as Torres reveals recordings of crew training sessions where instructors provided subtle guidance on applying additional scrutiny to certain owners while maintaining plausible deniability. She explains how these unofficial policies were communicated through implication and example rather than direct instruction, creating a culture of discrimination while avoiding explicit documentation. Judge Harrison pays particular attention as Torres describes the aftermath of various incidents, including how complaints from minority owners were consistently downplayed, misclassified, or lost within the company's reporting system. She provides specific examples of reports that were altered or deliberately misfiled to obscure their discriminatory nature. The courtroom grows silent as Torres shares emotional accounts of minority owners' reactions to discriminatory treatment, describing their dignity in the face of humiliation and their reluctance to challenge the system for fear of facing even greater scrutiny. She explains how many chose to simply endure the treatment rather than risk confrontation with crew members who held immediate power over their ability to access their own aircraft. Torres concludes her testimony by describing her decision to come forward after learning about Dar Mitchell's incident, explaining how the similarities to countless other cases she had witnessed convinced her to break her silence. She describes her hope that her testimony will help bring about meaningful change in the industry despite the personal and professional risks she faces as a whistleblower. The tension in the courtroom escalates as Ada Kim projects the internal company messages onto the large display screen, timestamps and sender information clearly visible for all to see. The first message from Captain Stevens to the crew group chat appears reading, "No way, she's the real owner, must be some mistake, check everything twice," followed by a series of agreeing responses from other crew members, their casual discrimination laid bare in black and white. Digital forensics expert Dar Allen Chen takes the stand, explaining how these messages were recovered from the Ares Aviation Services internal communication system, including deleted messages that revealed an even deeper pattern of bias. He walks the court through the sequence of messages sent during the 18 minutes Dar Mitchell stood on the tarmac, showing how crew members actively discussed ways to delay and discourage her. The evidence reveals a particularly damaging exchange between Parker and Stevens, discussing previous encounters with minority owners. Parker writing, "Remember that guy last month who claimed he owned the Cessna Citation? Turned out he really did own it. Guess we better double check this one too," followed by laughing emojis. The casual nature of their discrimination becoming increasingly apparent as more messages appear on screen. Further messages show the crew discussing Dar Mitchell's appearance with comments like "doesn't look like our usual owner type" and "better safe than sorry" with these types, suggesting an ingrained culture of prejudice within the company. The timestamps match perfectly with the security footage previously shown, demonstrating how these exchanges occurred while Dar Mitchell repeatedly presented her credentials. ADAkin presents a series of messages from the broader company chat groups showing similar discussions about other minority owners spanning months before the incident with Dar Mitchell. The language patterns reveal a consistent bias with terms like unusual suspects and non-standard owners regularly appearing in discussions about minority clients. The court's attention focuses on messages from upper management responding to previous complaints about discrimination, their responses showing a pattern of dismissal and deflection. One executive writing, "Just handle it quietly. We don't need another incident," making headlines. The systematic nature of the company's approach to discrimination becomes increasingly clear through their own documented communications. Technical evidence shows how these messages were shared across multiple levels of the company hierarchy, reaching supervisors and managers who failed to address the discriminatory behavior, instead responding with tacit approval or silence their inaction, effectively endorsing the crew's biased treatment of minority owners. Darkshen demonstrates how the message system included automated alerts confirming Dar Mitchell's ownership status, even as the crew continued to express doubt in their messages, highlighting the willful nature of their discrimination, as they actively ignored system verification in favor of their biased assumptions. The courtroom falls silent as messages from the immediate aftermath of the incident appear, showing crew members attempting to justify their actions, one writing, "Better to be thorough than let someone unauthorized on board," despite multiple system confirmations of Dar Mitchell's ownership having already appeared in their alert system. A series of panicked messages following Dar Mitchell's dismissal of the crew reveals their sudden recognition of their mistake, with Stevens writing, "We really messed up this time. She's actually somebody important," followed by attempts to coordinate their stories before speaking with management. The calculated nature of their response highlighting their awareness of their discriminatory behavior. The final set of messages shows management scrambling to contain the situation with instructions to delete communications and stick to the security protocol story, but their efforts to cover up the incident were thwarted by the digital forensics team recovering all deleted messages, providing clear evidence of both the discrimination and the attempted cover-up. Dr. Marcus Freeman adjusts his wire-rimmed glasses as he takes the witness stand, his 30 years of experience in aviation industry practices evident in his confident demeanor. The renowned expert begins by methodically outlining the standard procedures for aircraft owner verification, explaining how Aris Aviation Services crew deviated from every established protocol in their treatment of Dar Mitchell. The expert testimony details specific FAA regulations regarding owner aircraft access, showing highlighted sections that mandate electronic verification systems as the primary authority for ownership confirmation. Freeman demonstrates how the crew's decision to ignore the electronic confirmation directly violated these regulations, creating both a security risk and a breach of federal aviation guidelines. Using a detailed PowerPoint presentation, Freeman walks the court through the industry standard response times for owner verification, showing how the 18 minutes Dar Mitchell waited exceeded acceptable delays by over 15 minutes. He presents data from 20 major private airports, showing average verification times of less than 3 minutes for owners with electronic confirmation. The courtroom grows still as Freeman presents his analysis of Aris Aviation Services training materials, revealing significant departures from industry best practices, particularly in sections dealing with owner verification. He points out how the company's procedures created opportunities for discriminatory treatment by allowing crew members to override electronic verification without documented cause. Freeman highlights specific moments in the security footage where crew members violated safety protocols by creating unnecessary crowding on the tarmac, their actions contradicting basic aviation safety guidelines. He explains how their behavior not only discriminated against Dar Mitchell, but potentially compromised airport security by disrupting standard operations. The expert methodically deconstructs the defense's claims about security concerns, showing how the crew's actions actually increased security risks. By ignoring established verification systems, Freeman presents statistical analysis demonstrating how manual override of electronic verification systems significantly increases the likelihood of security breaches rather than preventing them. Drawing from his extensive research, Freeman presents comparative data showing how other private aviation services handle owner verification, revealing Aris Aviation Services as an outlier in both the frequency and duration of additional screening for minority owners. His analysis shows a statistical impossibility of these disparities occurring by chance. The testimony shifts to industry-standard customer service protocols as Freeman details how the crew's behavior violated multiple service guidelines. He presents training materials from leading aviation companies showing standard responses to owner verification, highlighting how Aris Aviation Services crew deviated from every established best practice. Freeman introduces evidence of economic impacts showing how discriminatory practices in private aviation create ripple effects through the industry. His analysis reveals significant financial losses both to individual owners experiencing delays and to companies developing reputations for biased treatment. The expert testimony includes detailed breakdowns of proper escalation procedures demonstrating how the crew failed to follow any standard conflict resolution protocols. Freeman explains how proper procedures would have involved immediately contacting airport management rather than creating a public confrontation. Using advanced data visualization, Freeman presents patterns of discrimination across the private aviation industry, highlighting how Aris Aviation Services practices represented a particularly egregious example of systematic bias. His charts show alarming correlations between owner demographics and enhanced screening procedures. The courtroom absorbs complex technical information as Freeman explains how modern aviation security systems are designed specifically to prevent subjective bias in owner verification. He demonstrates how the crew's actions undermine sophisticated security protocols, replacing automated systems with biased human judgment. Freeman concludes his expert testimony by presenting recommendations for industry-wide reforms, drawing from successful models in other aviation sectors. He emphasizes how proper adherence to electronic verification systems naturally prevents discriminatory practices by removing opportunities for individual bias. The courtroom atmosphere crackles with energy as evidence is presented showing Dar Mitchell's immediate response to the discrimination she faced. Security footage shows her maintaining remarkable composure as she accessed the Aris Aviation Services owner portal on her phone, her fingers steady as she executed her authority to dismiss the entire crew effective immediately. ADA Kim presents the official dismissal documentation timestamped at 1006 hours showing how Dar Mitchell followed every corporate protocol perfectly in her decisive action. The electronic trail reveals multiple system confirmations of her ownership status even as she typed the dismissal notice, contradicting the crew's claims about uncertainty regarding her identity. The evidence timeline continues with Dar Mitchell's immediate filing of formal complaints first to the FAA at 10:47 hours, followed by a comprehensive report to Aris Aviation Services corporate offices at 11:23 hours, both complaints meticulously detailed with supporting documentation including photographs, witness statements, and timestamped videos from bystanders. Captain Anderson, Dar Mitchell's regular pilot, takes the stand describing how he witnessed her handling of the situation from across the tarmac. He testifies about her reputation for professionalism and her history of treating all crew members with respect, making the discriminatory treatment she received even more striking in contrast. The court reviews Dar Mitchell's subsequent actions, including her immediate hiring of an independent aviation consulting firm to audit all previous incidents of potential discrimination at the airport, her decisive response creating a ripple effect throughout the private aviation industry as other facilities began examining their own practices. Documentation shows how Dar Mitchell leveraged her position on several hospital boards to implement immediate policy changes regarding medical transport services, refusing to contract with companies showing patterns of discriminatory behavior, her actions effectively forcing aviation services to confront their biases or risk losing lucrative medical transport contracts. The prosecution presents evidence of Dar Mitchell's establishment of a legal defense fund for aviation professionals facing discrimination, committing $5 million of her own money to support similar cases, her swift action encouraging others to come forward with their experiences of discrimination in the industry. Email records revealed Dar Mitchell's communication with other minority aircraft owners, organizing a coalition to address systematic discrimination in private aviation, her leadership bringing together influential voices from medicine, business, entertainment, and sports to demand industry-wide changes. The court examines Dar Mitchell's collaboration with civil rights organizations, establishing a monitoring system for discriminatory incidents in private aviation, her technical expertise as both a pilot and aircraft owner, adding credibility to the initiatives she spearheaded. Security footage from subsequent weeks shows Dar Mitchell returning to the airport head held high, continuing to fly her aircraft while implementing new procedures for her own aviation staff, including mandatory anti-bias training and clear protocols for owner verification regardless of appearance. Evidence presents Dar Mitchell's media response, choosing to focus on systematic change. Rather than personal vindication, her interviews consistently emphasizing the need for industry-wide reform, rather than individual punishment, her measured approach gaining widespread support from aviation professionals. The prosecution displays statistics showing how Dar Mitchell's actions inspired a 40% increase in discrimination reporting within the private aviation sector, her courage in confronting the issue directly encouraging others to stand up against similar treatment. Documentation reveals how Dar Mitchell used her influence to push for legislative changes, meeting with state and federal representatives to discuss aviation industry reform, her medical background and business success lending weight to her advocacy for stronger anti-discrimination measures. The court reviews Dar Mitchell's establishment of a scholarship program for minority pilots and aviation professionals, her immediate response to discrimination, including proactive measures to prevent similar incidents in the future, demonstrating her commitment to lasting change rather than mere retribution. Aris Aviation Services CEO Robert Davidson shifts uncomfortably in the witness chair as he faces intense questioning about his company's discriminatory practices, his tailored suit and practiced corporate demeanor beginning to crack under A.D. Kim's relentless examination, the questions focusing on statistical evidence showing clear patterns of bias in owner verification procedures. Davidson attempts to defend his company's practices, citing security protocols, but stumbles when presented with data showing minority aircraft owners were subjected to additional screening 17 times more frequently than white owners, his explanation growing increasingly confused as Kim presents quarter-by-quarter breakdowns of verification delays categorized by owner demographics. The CEO visibly flinches as internal company emails appear on the courtroom display, showing his direct responses to previous discrimination complaints, including one where he wrote, "Let's not make this a bigger issue than it needs to be, handle it quietly." The timestamp revealing this directive was sent just hours after receiving detailed evidence of discriminatory treatment. Kim presents Davidson with Aris Aviation Services quarterly profit reports, highlighting how the company maintained lucrative contracts with multiple airports while systematically discriminating against minority owners. The CEO struggles to explain why no meaningful changes were implemented despite numerous documented complaints and clear evidence of bias. The courtroom watches as Davidson attempts to distance himself from the daily operations of his company, claiming ignorance of specific incidents, but Kim produces meeting minutes showing his direct involvement in developing owner verification procedures, including notes where he emphasized discretionary screening measures. Performance reviews presented as evidence reveal how crew members who applied stricter scrutiny to minority owners received positive evaluations for their attention to security, while those who questioned discriminatory practices faced negative reviews and reduced opportunities for advancement. Davidson grows visibly uncomfortable as financial records show the company spent more on legal fees defending discrimination claims than on actual diversity training and bias prevention programs, his attempts to justify this allocation of resources falling flat against the mounting evidence of systematic discrimination. The CEO struggles to maintain composure as Kim presents documentation showing how Aris Aviation Services actively worked to suppress statistics about discriminatory incidents, the company's internal reporting system designed to categorize bias complaints under general customer service issues, making them harder to track. Evidence reveals Davidson's direct involvement in creating policies that gave crew members broad discretion in owner verification while simultaneously limiting accountability for discriminatory behavior, his signature appearing on documents that effectively enabled bias while protecting the company from liability. The courtroom tension increases as Kim presents emails showing Davidson personally intervened to prevent the release of discrimination statistics to industry regulators, his actions deliberately obscuring the scope of the problem while publicly claiming commitment to equal treatment. Davidson attempts to defend his leadership by citing the company's diversity initiatives, but falters when confronted with budget allocations showing these programs received minimal funding while millions were spent on marketing campaigns designed to repair the company's image after discrimination incidents. The CEO faces difficult questions about his response to Dar Mitchell's incident, particularly his immediate attempt to frame it as a security protocol issue, rather than addressing the underlying discrimination, his initial public statements contradicting video evidence and electronic verification records. Kim presents evidence of Davidson's compensation package revealing significant bonuses tied to minimizing legal settlements, including discrimination claims, the financial incentives clearly prioritizing complaint suppression over actual prevention of discriminatory behavior. The courtroom falls silent as Davidson struggles to explain company metrics showing crew members were unofficially evaluated on their ability to maintain exclusive customer environment, the coded language barely concealing the discriminatory intent behind service quality measurements. Judge Harrison adjusts his robes and clears his throat, preparing to deliver what would become known as a landmark verdict in discrimination cases. Within the private aviation industry, the packed courtroom falls into complete silence as he begins to speak, his voice carrying the weight of decades of legal experience. The judge systematically outlines the evidence presented throughout the trial, highlighting the overwhelming statistical proof of systematic discrimination at Ares Aviation Services, his summary pointing to the 17-fold increase in additional screening procedures applied to minority aircraft owners compared to their white counterparts. Judge Harrison addresses the company's failed attempts to justify their actions, noting how each defense argument crumbled under scrutiny. He specifically cites the electronic verification system that had confirmed Dar Mitchell's ownership, while the crew continued their discriminatory behavior, marking this as clear evidence of intentional bias. The verdict begins with a finding of liability against Ares Aviation Services for discriminatory practices, violation of federal aviation regulations, and breach of contract, the judge emphasizing how the company's actions represented a particularly egregious example of institutional discrimination in the luxury services sector. Moving to damages, Judge Harrison orders Ares Aviation Services to pay $45 million in compensatory damages to Dar Mitchell, noting that the amount reflects both the direct harm caused and the broader impact of discriminatory practices on her professional activities, including the missed medical conference. The court further imposes punitive damages of $120 million, citing the company's deliberate efforts to conceal discriminatory practices and the need to create meaningful deterrence within the industry, the judge specifically noting how the amount represents approximately 30% of the company's annual revenue. Judge Harrison mandates comprehensive reforms within Ares Aviation Services, including the implementation of a court-supervised anti-bias training program, regular external audits of owner verification procedures, and mandatory reporting of screening statistics to federal aviation authorities. The verdict requires Ares Aviation Services to establish an independent oversight board with majority representation from minority aviation professionals. This board granted authority to review company policies, conduct surprise audits, and enforce compliance with anti-discrimination measures. The judge orders the company to create a $15 million fund specifically designated for supporting minority aviation professionals, including scholarships, mentorship programs, and legal support for discrimination cases, the fund to be administered by an independent committee of industry experts and civil rights advocates. Harrison addresses the broader implications of the case, ordering Ares Aviation Services to share all evidence of discriminatory practices with industry regulators and requiring quarterly public reports on progress toward eliminating bias in their operations. The verdict includes specific provisions for monitoring crew behavior, requiring body cameras during all owner verification procedures, establishing clear guidelines for electronic verification systems, and implementing severe penalties for violations of anti-discrimination policies. Judge Harrison concludes by announcing the court's retention of jurisdiction over the case for a minimum of 5 years, ensuring compliance with all ordered reforms and maintaining the ability to impose additional sanctions if the company fails to meet its obligations. The courtroom buzzes with energy as the judge addresses Dar Mitchell's decision to establish a foundation using the settlement funds to support minority aviation professionals, commending her commitment to creating lasting change within the industry. The verdict closes with a broader message to the private aviation industry, warning that similar discriminatory practices will face equally severe consequences, while emphasizing the court's commitment to ensuring equal access and treatment for all aircraft owners regardless of race or ethnicity. Judge Harrison rises, signaling the end of this historic case, his verdict setting new precedents for addressing discrimination in luxury services and establishing clear standards for accountability in the private aviation industry, the impact of his decision promising to reshape practices far beyond the walls of his courtroom.